evening, everyone. Welcome to CPVP Talks with Jamilu, Rabiu. Our topic tonight is armed violence against school children. Jamilu Rabiu is a lecturer at the Department of Social Sciences and Administration, School of Continuing Education, Bayero University, Kano, Nigeria. He is currently pursuing his PhD in political science at Kenyatta University, Nairobi, Kenya. His areas of research interest include security, gender, and governance. Welcome, Jamilu, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you for having me tonight to discuss this topical issue. Good evening, and good evening all our viewers.
Good evening, Jamilu, and welcome again. Over the past few years, the level of violence against school children has increased tremendously in northern Nigeria, and much of the world is unaware of the dangers children face trying to get an education. Why does this problem of kidnapping and other forms of violence persist against school children in northern Nigeria?
Thank you very much for these questions. Once again, thank you for having me tonight to discuss this topical issue. As you rightly pointed out, children in northern Nigeria are actually facing a serious threats while trying to actually access education. And I want to say that the history of violence against school children in northern Nigeria began with the abduction of Chibok girls by the Boko Haram militant insurgent group in April 2014, where about 276 school children were abducted. And thereafter, in 2018, there was also abduction of girls' secondary schools, about 110 girls' secondary schools in Dapchi, in Yobe State, also by Boko Haram. And as I said, thereafter, systematic practice and of course, massive kidnapping of school children spread. And from the northwest, from the northeast to the northwest, which is mainly operated by the bandits. Now, the question is, as you said, why is it so? Why the northern Nigeria? As we know, it is on record that even this year, about 1,000 school children has been abducted by the armed bandits. But why is this so? Now, going to these questions, I think, to me, I have divided the reasons for this attack on schools, and generally, of course, and the banditry into two. On one hand, there are vulnerability factors, and then on the other hand, there are motivating factors, which actually made the insurgent, the bandit, to attack schools. Now, on the vulnerability aspect, the issue of poverty has become a serious, it's a source of concern to many, including policymakers, because the northern part of the country happen to have the highest number of poverty compared to other parts of the country. statistics shows that about 55% to 90% of poverty in Nigeria is concentrated in the Northwest, the 7 Northwestern states and 3 of the Northeastern states. Of course, but we need to stress here that poverty on its own cannot be the determining factor of the banditry and armed violence, but it is a primary vulnerability factor which can actually expose the youth to engage in violence. Then related to this is the issue of unemployment. There is also issue of which is also common in the Northwest. Then the issue of education also. The Northwest, like many other parts of the North, has been left behind in terms of education. So there is this factor of lack of education as also one of the vulnerability factor. Then the issue of border closure is also a contributing factor to the armed banditry in the Northwest, as many people are aware that there was already an established illicit business activities in the border, Nigerian border, in particular, the areas, in particular in Zamfara and Katsina state that are bordering the Niger Republic. Now, there was a kind of an established illicit business activity, particularly the issue of importation of rice, smuggling of rice. Now, when government came up with the policy to ban the importation of rice, many people who actually benefit from that illicit business were displaced. And therefore, of course, they need to look for a way of survival because that illicit business activity has been their means of daily survival. And then the other issue of concern is the political factors as also one of the vulnerability factor which lead to that. The issue of poor leadership has been at the forefront. And then the issue of corruption, the issue of lack of youth and women participation. Of course, this problem is not limited to the Northwest. It is a common problem across most African countries. When you look at it, the youth, the space for the engagement of youth in the political process has been limited. Youth has been excluded and alienated in the process. And therefore, in trying to find space for themselves, sometimes the youth engage in some of these bandit activities and other forms of crime. Now, there is also issue of lack of inadequate security. And here I mean in terms of number. In Nigeria, we look at it, a country with almost a population of 200 million has only about 300,000 security personnel. This is grossly inadequate to actually provide the needed security in the country, including the Northwest. Then related to that, there is also the issue of lack of training on the part of the security personnel. But of course, here what I'm trying to emphasize here is that, of course, we have quite many Nigerian security personnel who are actually well trained. But of course, you see that some of these personnel who has the skills and training to actually deliver in their functions were mostly serving the political class. You hardly see them deployed into the rural areas. Therefore, mostly they are found in providing protection to other political class and of course in the major cities. And at the same time, some of them were also used to provide security in the big multinational companies that we have in the country. So that is also a contributing factor. And there's also issue of underfunded security forces. No matter the level of training, no matter the level of commitment on the part of the security personnel, if they are underfunded, they cannot perform actually, because there are so many things related to this. Underfunding may result in lack of weapons, may result in lack of incentives, And of course, that may affect the morale of the security personnel to deliver. And this, I think, on the part of the socioeconomic vulnerability aspects, I think these are some of the issues. Then there is also the issue of geographical factors, which have also made the Northwest, in particular, vulnerable. The size of Northwest stretching from, in particular, where the bandits are operating, from the Polgore forest in Kano State, stretching up to Kaduna, Zamfara, which now this has actually made it very difficult. The size of the terrain has made it very difficult for actually the security personnel to man these areas. It is on record that in Kaduna in particular, Birningwari has about 6,000 kilometer size of the landmass, which is also more than the Lagos state in the Northwest. So the size of the territory of the northern part of the country has also served as a contributing factor. Then also the issue of forest border. Of course, this is the more national issue. Nigerian border, we have about more than 1,000 interests. And therefore there is a lack of, as I said in the beginning, while trying to explain the socioeconomic vulnerabilities, that lack of manpower in terms of security has actually affected the security protection in the area. Then, of course, the issue of conflicts and banditry in the Northwest cannot be explained without making reference to the regional and global factor. We are all aware about the conflict in Libya, which also has spillover effects in many other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, including Nigeria. And then also the process of globalization and the growth, as well as the expansions of illicit armed trades, has made it easier for actually bandits operating in the Northwest and of course, other armed groups to get easy access to the weapons, which they actually use to attack schools. Now, there is what I also see as the motivating factor. Why the armed group target the schools in particular? I think this is even more relevant to the question you have posed. Now, the issue of ransom payments has been one of the contributing factors. Of course, as I said, when this issue of kidnapping started in the Northeast by Boko Haram insurgents, there was allegations that just before securing the release of the Chibok girls, there was a payment of ransom by the government. But of course, government has denied that. But it is, of course, unthinkable for actually the Boko Haram to release those girls without getting something in return. So now that the payment of ransom has made kidnapping a kind of lucrative business and that has actually become attractive to the bandit even operating in the Northwest. Then the issue of revenge, of course, this is more particular to Boko Haram, because for those who follow the trend of events, when Boko Haram kidnapped the Chibok girls, in one of the videos that they then, a de facto leader of the group, Abubakar Shekau, released, he made it clear that Nigerian security agencies has actually arrested and detained their families. So therefore, kidnapping school children in this way is a way of exerting revenge on the Nigerian society. And related to that is the issue of bargaining power. Armed groups tend to actually attack schools and children because that gives them advantage when it comes to negotiation. And of course, publicity. We all remember when the Boko Haram actually kidnapped the Chibok girls. I have been making reference to that. It actually drew the global attention. And that publicity has been one of the factors that actually made the Boko Haram to actually attack and kidnap students in Chibok. Then there is also issue of domestic work. As we know, even during conflict, life has to move on. We have to move on with life even during conflict, and therefore children, especially school children, women, are kidnapped by the armed group to perform some of these productive activities like cooking, cleaning, and of course laundry. As I said, after the military crackdown in Borno on Boko Haram members, they ran to the hideout, mostly leaving their families. Now, as I said, life has to continue even during armed conflicts. Now they need girls or women who will actually cook for them, who can perform the laundry and other productive activities, as I've made mention. Then related to that is the issue of participation in armed violence in form of child soldiers and suicide bombers. We have seen it in different parts of the world, including in Iraq, where underage children were actually engaged as child soldiers. So that has also been one of the factors that actually exposed school children to violence by the armed group. Then abduction of schools, the relative easier with which actually the abduction of school children, the relative easier with which the armed group abduct the school children has also made it very attractive to them, because it actually needs less efforts, but it provides results. What I'm trying to say is that due to school location, mostly the schools that have been attacked by these armed bandits and of course Boko Haram are located in the rural areas, far from the communities, and in most cases very far from the security outfit or police stations. So that has also contributed to making schools vulnerable to attack by the armed groups. So I think these are some of the factors or some of the reasons as why we have the problem in the Northwest and of course some part of Northeastern Nigeria.
Okay. Thank you so much for underlining these particular points as part of the response. I was just gonna ask you all this issue that you have talked about so far. How does it impact the families of the children and the communities? And also, how do children still get the courage to attend school, to attend classes, despite the risk that they face?
Well, I think the issue of the impact of this armed banditry on families and communities is very clear. But let me say that to have a bigger picture of this impact or consequence of this armed banditry, we need to also look at it from the perspective of the students who are the victims, before even the family. And these effects on the students can be seen from the following. One, loss of life. In the process of abduction, of being in the captivity, some students lost their lives, even though it's hard to get the statistics. But it is clear that in the process, some students lost their lives. Now, the other consequence of this armed banditry is on the student is the abuses. When the students are kidnapped, they were subjected to various forms of abuse, including forced labor, sometimes even sexual abuse. Now, the other issue or impact of this armed violence on school children is that it affects or subject these students to trauma. Being in the captivity at that age, 10, 12, 15, as the case may be, has been very horrible for the students. And in the process, quite a number of students developed trauma. I remember in October, Nigerian's president has also raised concern about the effects of these armed attacks on school facilities and students on the trauma. I think the statistics given at that time is that about 12 million Nigerian children, Nigerian school children, are afraid to go to schools because of the trauma they have already developed. And this trauma can have a long-lasting effect on the well-being of the student and of course on learning, even after they have been released from the captivity, even after they have go back to their normal activities. This trauma can still affect them. Then the other issue, which is also related to the impact of this armed banditry on the students, is it affects enrollment and school attendance. Now, I say this effect on victims and students. Now here, the implications or the effect of this armed banditry goes beyond the direct victims. Even other students who have not been victims of this violence are afraid to go to schools because of the fear, as you laid in your background. And it is on record that as a result of these incessant attacks on schools and students in northern part of the country, in particular in the Northwest, the number of out-of-school children in Nigeria increases from 10 million in 2015 to almost now about 30 million in 2019, as the UNICEF report indicated. Now, then it also lowers student achievement. These armed banditry and attack on students. Now, coming back to the issue of the effects of this violence on the family, I think I want to say that this issue of trauma is not only affecting the students, also affects the parents. When the news broke of a child being abducted, some parents also develop trauma. And it also has implications on the economy of the family. In a way, sometimes we expose family to poverty because when especially in the Northwest, where the banditry are been operating, they are moved basically by the desire for ransom. So when they kidnap the student, the next thing is to actually contact the family to pay for ransom to get their children released. Now, in the process, many families have become bankrupt. They were exposed to poverty because, depending on their financial status, you have to actually arrange for that money, pay the bandit, and then get your child released. So that also affects the economy of the family. Then it also has implication on communities and region. What I mean here is that this armed violence against school children may already increases the existing educational imbalance between the rural and urban communities. When you look at the rate of student enrollment and school attendance, even within the Northwest, there is this disparity between the urban and the rural communities. And most of these armed banditry is happening at the rural communities. So I'm trying to say that this armed banditry has implication on uh, um, has implication on school attendance or educational development of the rural communities compared with urban communities. And within the affected state, it also has implication on region. As I said in the background, the issue of one of the vulnerability factors is lack of education. Already there is an existing imbalance between the north and the southern part of Nigeria. And now the fact that this armed banditry is happening in the northwest, it will further widen the educational gap. Because as I said, now about many schools have been closed down, even though maybe you have to discuss that later, because of these bandit activities. And therefore, many, quite a large number of children who are supposed to be in classes were not attending schools because of the activities of bandit and because of fear of being kidnapped. Now, this will have a regional implication, and it will widen the existing educational gap between the northern and southern part of Nigeria. Now, the issue of why the children still get courage to attend to the schools, I think, to me, despite the threat and fear of violence from the armed groups, as you rightly pointed out, children still attended classes in places where the government allows schools to operate because they don't want to be left behind. So I think in a way, the children are even more resilient. Despite the fear, they still attend classes because they don't want to be left behind. Because at the time when their counterparts are attending classes in other part of the country, they too, they try to also attend classes in the midst of the fear. So the children are, of course, resilient in a way.
Thank you for your answer. Yes, I was wondering at a national level, for instance, how does this problem impact Nigeria as a nation? We have talked about families, about communities. Let's talk about Nigeria as a whole nation. How does this impact it?
Well, of course, as you said, the consequence of this armed banditry and attacks on schools has implication not only on the students, not only on the family and the community, it also has a national impact. And to me, one of the national impact of this armed banditry, as far as child education is concerned, is that it will make it very difficult for Nigeria to actually meet United Nations Sustainable Development Goals of education for all by the year 2030 when this trend continues. Because as it is, in some states in the Northwest, like Zamfara State, schools have been closed for almost 3 to 4 months now. And therefore, quite thousands number of students who are supposed to be in classes were at home. And if this trend continues, of course, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for Nigeria to actually meet that target. And then the other issue is of this impact on the nation is the fact that the failure for the government to actually protect the children and the schools has created a kind of ungoverned spaces. And that, of course, affects the legitimacy of the states, because one of the core functions of state is to protect the lives and property of the people, including the children. Now, that inability or failure of the government to actually protect the schools, to allow the children to resume schools, will have also implication on the legitimacy of on the legitimacy of the Nigerian states. And then, of course, it has another national implication by way of diversion of resources. Now, when you look at it, since the Boko Haram insurgency began, up to now, when we have this issue of armed banditry in the Northwest, Nigeria has been spending much in the area of security. And some of these resources would have been better used to develop infrastructure, including education, which of course the child will be the primary beneficiary. Now, that is another implication of this violence, because a lot of resources have been diverted from infrastructure to security. And then also it has implication on foreign investment. This continued violence in the Northwest, and of course, the Boko Haram in the Northeast has also affected foreign investors' confidence, because no one is ready to come and invest when there is no security. So of course, that is another implication of this armed violence at the national level.
You have somehow, by your previous answer, you have somehow anticipated my next question, because I was wondering if you could tell us what have been the government, the community, the religious leaders, the regional bodies been doing about this problem? What has been their response so far, and how effective the measures that they have taken have been so far?
Well, I want to say that since this violence started, there are different responses. In particular, the violence against school children generate a lot of responses from different actors. Some of the responses include the outright use of force. Some talk about dialogue. Some, of course, payment of ransom. In a way, is also part of the response, because when you kidnap the student, when the armed banditry kidnap the student, the next they demand ransom, and at some point, the government or the parent has to pay. But even though the government at different point in time denied payment of ransom, but some report indicated that government do pay ransom. I remember the report by John Campbell of Foreign Affairs indicated that when the armed banditry kidnapped Ankara students, the government paid ransom before the children were released. So now these are some of the responses, but at the same time, there is on the part of the community, there is formation of these vigilante groups, which also in a way provide security to the community and of course fight the bandits. There is a part of the responses which the government did in the midst of this attack on schools and students is to close the schools, temporary closure of schools, and sometimes even reassign or transfer the student to other areas that are less vulnerable. But I must say that even that response on itself has another implication, as it is, as I made mention, the closure of school has left many thousands number of school children at home, and then at the same time, some were transferred to other schools which are less vulnerable. But this transfer of students to other part of the states, to some other part of the states that are seen as less vulnerable, may also have negative knock-on effects on the students. One, when they go to the schools where they were reassigned, you see that there was no expansion of the existing infrastructure. And already there is a problem of overcrowded classes. So that add to that, and it may affect even learning. And at the same time, some of the victims, most of the attacks by the armed banditry on schools are actually targeted boarding schools. Now, when these boarding schools were closed, some were made to actually attend day classes. Now, that may also expose them to other antisocial behaviors. And of course, they may spend less time, they may likely spend less time studying than when they are in boarding schools. So, of course, these are some of the measures that actually government have taken, communities, and of course, religious leaders. And of course, recently, there was issue of suspension of telecommunication network and other trade-related activities in some of the affected states. For example, Zamfara, Kaduna, have actually taken these measures. But the implication of that is that, to me, the result of the suspension of communication has not actually yielded the positive outcome. And then the other issue is recently the issue of declaration of bandits as terrorists by the Nigerian state. And these are some of the responses. There was dialogue and negotiation. Especially some of these dialogues happened as a result of intervention of religious leaders and of course traditional leaders. There was payment of ransom, there was military strategy which involved the use of force, there was temporary closure of schools, suspension of telecommunications, and declaration of the bandit as terrorist group. These are some of the responses that actually we got in the midst of these armed banditry and attacks on schools. Now, the issue is how effective, whether these responses has been effective. I think, to me, we measure the effectiveness of a policy or response based on the outcomes. As it is, as I said, in the Zamfara state, schools have been closed in the last 3 to 4 months, and the students were at home without attending classes. And these bandits has actually become de factors in some communities. There are de facto leaders in some communities. Some traditional leaders have even left some of the communities, and they are all like they have occupied the space created. They levy taxes on farmers before you harvest. They go to community, they levy tax on them. You have to pay this social amount before this a particular deadline. Now, to me, if these bandits continue to operate in the region, it means all the measures have not actually been effective. Neither the telecommunication suspensions, nor the talk, dialogue, or the use of force has actually provided the needed positive outcome expected. Because the bandit, in most cases, adopted to the responses and retool their activities. So it is clear they're in control of many villages in Zamfara state. In Sokoto state, the bandits are in control of many communities, local communities, without even the presence of security agencies. So I think that is what I have to say about that.
Well, given this conclusion that you just said, and as someone from that region, in what way do you think this problem of insecurity when it comes to school children can be addressed in a more effective manner?
Well, I think to secure schools, from insecurity and attacks from the armed banditry in the Northwest, I think the first thing to do is to make sure that the whole region is secured from the bandits. Securing school children against armed group is a challenging task, of course, looking at especially the most vulnerable one. When you look at it, as I said, some of the target schools are actually boarding schools who are mostly located in a distant places. Now, I want to say that before you secure the schools, we have to secure the region from the bandits. School can never be secured unless we secure the communities and society, because the schools are also part of the society. And what affects the society also affect the school and the children. And in fact, what we are seeing here is the violence against school and children is an extension and of course expression of violence against the society. Since schools are part of the society, we have to first, government and all other relevant actors must first secure the region from the armed bandits. And I think that is the only way the schools and the children will be saved. And this requires cooperation of all actors, and of course, adopting a regional framework. I remember one of the major issues why this problem escalated is the lack of regional framework. Different states adopt different strategies to handle this issue of armed banditry. And to me, regional problems require regional solutions. Since banditry cut across the northwestern states, state acting alone cannot solve the problem, because this violence can be displaced from one state to another. So I'm saying that there is need for cooperation among the states in the region, cooperation among the state security services, and of course, cooperation with the vigilantes. They could also be instrumental in supporting state efforts to protect, to provide security, and of course, protect the schools. Now, in the short term, because it is not possible for Nigeria to man security officers or personnel to guard or protect the schools, the vigilantes can be of instrumental use in securing the schools by protecting the children. However, the vigilantes also need to be well trained about, in particular, the school safety. They need to be trained about school safety, they need to be properly motivated, and they need to be monitored so that they cannot abuse the power given to them. Now, the staff and the student also need to be educated about school safety.
Thank you, Jamilu, for your very, very valuable presentation and information, and also for these solutions that you gave. I would like to ask you if there is anything else that you would like to add regarding our discussion today. It's been almost an hour. We are going to close it very soon. But if there's anything else on this topic that you would like to add, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would is to restate what I've said about the need for cooperation among all the relevant stakeholders. And there is also the need for the government to be more proactive. And at the same time, I think one of the missing links is the political will to fight this banditry in the Northwest. So I'm saying that it is time for the government to be proactive to address this issue of banditry so that school children can go back to classes and continue with their education. Because as it is, education is a fundamental right of citizens, including the children. But because of these bandit activities, many children has been left at home without going to schools. So it is time for government to actually be proactive to fight this banditry and insurgency so that normalcy can be restored in the region and the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Jamilu Rabiu has been our guest for tonight's CPVP talks on the topic of armed violence against school children. It has been an honor for us to have you as our guest. Thank you one more time.
Thank you for the time and for the invitation.
Of course, and thank you to our viewers. Wishing everybody a good evening, and we will see each other again at our next CPVP talks. Good night, everybody.